Jair Bolsonaro is closing in on Brazil's presidency after dominating the first round of voting. Bolsonaro wound up with 46% of the vote, just short of the majority that he needed to win outright. Bolsonaro will face Workers' Party candidate Fernando Haddad in a runoff on October 28th. Joining us now from Sao Paulo is our bureau chief there, Julia Leite. So, Julia, welcome. This was a really strong showing by Mr. Bolsonaro. We expected him to do well. Are people surprised he did this well?
They definitely are. The last few polls that we had were Saturday evening, and they showed Bolsonaro below 40%. So 46%, and that is the first numbers that came out had him at 49 with about half of the votes counted. So it was much stronger than expected. And not just Bolsonaro, but candidates backed by Bolsonaro. His son had a very, very high vote count. It was a record for a lawmaker. And also a lot of the candidates, both for governor and lawmakers, federal and state lawmakers that he backed, did really well.
So does that really give us a precursor for the runoff as a practical matter? What are the odds against Mr. Haddad at this point?
Eurasia Consultancy last night changed Bolsonaro's odds. They were at 60 for him to win the runoff, and they're now at 75. What we have been hearing from analysts is that this is basically his to lose. He would need to make a really big mistake in the second part of the campaign to lose the runoff.
And yet, do we have a good sense of what Mr. Bolsonaro would mean for the markets, for business? He hasn't been too explicit on his plans, as I understand it.
He hasn't, and what goes against Bolsonaro a little bit is that the plans his economic advisor put forward are very different from what Bolsonaro has voted for in his 30 years as a congressman. So he has never really voted to back privatizations or reform. So markets are a little bit uncertain about how these plans will go about, but they really would prefer Bolsonaro other than Haddad.
Okay, Julia, thank you so very much. That's our bureau chief down in Sao Paulo, Julia Leite. Alex?
All right, joining us now from Washington is Monica de Bolle, Peterson Institute for International Economics Senior Fellow, and Jane Foley of Rabobank is still with us on the phone. Monica, your reaction?
Well, the same. It was quite an astounding win. It was one that had been sort of previewed in the last few months with Bolsonaro standing in the polls, but nonetheless, 46% is a very large margin that he has now over his opponent Haddad. Not only that, the other big story coming out of Brazil last night was the shift in the Congress. So there was a lot of congressional renovation, not necessarily good renovation from some perspectives, but certainly the Congress has now become much more conservative and much more hard right than the outgoing one.
For markets to continue to feel optimistic about what they might see out of Brazil, Monica, what kind of economic policies do we need to see delivered from Bolsonaro as well as the Congress?
Well, we will need to see, first of all, what Mr. Bolsonaro actually intends to do. As your bureau chief was saying, and very rightly so, we don't really know, because he has been espousing completely different views throughout his entire time as a congressperson from his economic advisor. So his economic advisor is a pro-market ultra-liberal, but that's not Mr. Bolsonaro throughout his years in office. He's always been a nationalist. He's always been pro-state interventionism. So we have to see really what he says in the next 3 weeks about his economic intentions. One of the most important things in Brazil, obviously, is getting a pension reform approved. And here's where we have to know, what are his plans, what are his details for his proposed pension reform, and what else does he intend to do to get the country out of this quagmire of terrible fiscal outcomes and still very low growth.